Racial inequity in higher education. Michel Garcia.
Delia Gomez.
Arica Kincheloe.
Have you ever heard the phrases,
Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
those who work harder get farther?
Race doesn't matter, we all have hardships.
People seem to think we all start out on an equal playing field when it comes to education. Let's learn a little bit more about why that isn't true. Do you know where schools get their money? You may be thinking the government gives schools all of their money, but this isn't quite true. The government supplies 10 cents for every dollar that goes into the K-12 education system. Schools receive their funding from property taxes in their school districts. The amount of money schools get will vary based on the property values in the school district, so richer schools will have more funding and nicer schools, while poorer districts have students in dilapidated schools and are lucky to have enough resources to make their students competitive applicants to four-year universities. Many of these schools largely serve students of color. This leads to an increase in dropouts. When schools don't have funds for teachers, they hire resource officers to handle disciplinary action. This leads to a rise in in-school arrests and reliance on police for discipline. Often, students are arrested in class for disruptions, creating a literal school-to-prison pipeline. Much like in prisons, students of color are often targeted more than their white counterparts. Students of color often face overcriminalization due to media's portrayal of people of color as deviant. And from 2008 to 2013, there was a 10.4 decrease in enrollment to institutions of higher education for low-income students.
Retention. So now that we've discussed a little bit of why there are very real systemic and institutional barriers within the higher educational system, let's go a little further. Suppose our students go past the school-to-prison pipeline. Suppose they accumulate the credits and experience necessary to apply to a university. What happens when students of color make it to college? As low-income students of color, what do you do when you get to a big institution such as the University of Washington, especially when you are first generation? How do you navigate such a complex school and system? Where do you find the resources? Where do you fit in? How do you get to graduation? The reality is, for many students, you don't. And it's for the very same fact that they can't answer some of the questions mentioned previously. Once accepted, only about 58% of first-generation students of color make it to graduation. What does that really mean? Let's put it into perspective. Let's talk specifically about the UW. Currently at the University of Washington, students considered to be coming from underrepresented communities combined make up only 13% of an entire school of 40,000. More specifically, Latinx students are at about 7%. African American students are at 3.5%. Southeast Asian students, 3.2%. Native students, 1.3%. And Pacific Islander students, 1.1%. Now, if this hasn't surprised you enough, let's take a look at it further. Of the 2,082 Latinx students currently enrolled, only 1,200 will actually make it to graduation. Of 1,026 Black students, only 595 will make it to graduation. Of 1,000 Southeast Asian students, only 580 will make it to graduation. Of 394 Native students, only 228 will make it to graduation. And of 319 Pacific Islander students, only 185 will make it to graduation. Why is it our numbers look like this? I can tell you a few reasons. Number one, lack of preparedness. Students are coming from school systems that are heavily underfunded, overcrowded, and lack the basic resources to give students a competitive edge at a four-year institution. Number two, isolation and lack of belonging. Students of color often feel isolated and out of place because the UW mimics ambient classism, forcing students to adapt to new social norms. And number three, tokenization. As people of color, students are oftentimes seen as the exception rather than the expectation. They are also targets of racism from other students and faculty and are oftentimes expected to represent their entire race. Lack of integration and belonging into the university life can lead to less motivation, making it even harder to complete your degree. It is also extremely important to acknowledge that every student's experience is their own and can be shaped by various intersecting identities that can include class, gender, ability, citizenship status, orientation, and so much more.
What's next? Often ignoring the reality of living as a person of color in this country, there are many dismissive ways that people talk about the low numbers of students of color in higher education. Affirmative action is racist against white people. We live in a post-racial society. This rhetoric is inaccurate. These words are used to justify the mistreatment and discrimination that prevents students of color from accessing and staying in spaces of higher education. If by post-racial, you mean that we are post-looking at the way that racial identity impacts people's ability to access certain sectors of our society, you mean that affirmative action benefits more white women more than anyone else in this country. You mean that due to the sound of my name on a resume, I am more likely to get called in for an interview. If by post-racial, you mean that according to several studies, I am more likely to see higher education as an option for me, in no small part because 60% of the people filling those campuses look like me. 80% of the people running those institutions look like me. And 97% of the people who write and pass the laws in this country look just like me. When I say we, I am talking to everyone. But when I say we, I mean us white folks. I mean that us white folks need to not just see our privilege as white people, but the power that grants us. Need to talk to other white folks about our role in perpetuating these systems of oppression and inaccessibility. Need to step up, step in, and step out of the way. We have to call each other in and call each other out. We have to work to take the positions of power that have been given us and create space for those that have had their space taken away from them. This is necessary. We need to get involved. It is imperative that we all, everyone, everywhere, get involved to change these broken systems and institutions. No one is an expert. We are all learning and working together. Ask what ways you can best support and help make change happen, because the process to change starts with education and action. As a society, we cannot create equity for students of color in reaching higher education without people knowing the reality of these issues. We have to move toward abolition and away from punishment of students that don't live up to the rigid standard of neoliberal, colonialized version of success required to access higher education. In the long term, abolition is the goal. In the short term, you can help move toward that future by contacting local organizations. Ask what ways you can best support and help build these movements. If this video spoke to you in any way, then take action. Let's create support systems and be support systems.